Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia here at the Great Hall at Parliament House and today's Westpac address. My name's Laura Tingle. I'm the club's president and I'm chief political correspondent for the ABC 7:30. Today's guest at the traditional post-budget address is the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, who has just handed down his third budget and what looks like being the last budget before a federal election. It occurred to me this morning there's an obvious slogan for this budget, and I'm hoping that the Treasurer will explain why it's not being used. Jobs and growth. If you're following the conversation online, you can find us on Twitter. Our user handle is @PressClubAust and our hashtag is NPC. Everyone, please welcome the Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg.
Well, thank you very much, Laura. Firstly, can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to their elders past and present? Can I acknowledge the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack? Can I acknowledge the Finance Minister, my partner in this budget, Simon Birmingham? Can I acknowledge my many colleagues who are here today, and in particular the Assistant Treasurer, Michael Sukkar, and Jane Hume, who's the Minister for Financial Security, Women's Economic Security, who is here today, as well as many other colleagues. Can also acknowledge Dr. Stephen Kennedy as the Secretary of Treasury and Rosemary Huxtable, the Secretary of Finance, and thank their departments for the outstanding professionalism, dedication and capacity that they've shown over the course of this pandemic. The scale and the speed of decision-making has been unprecedented, and I think we can all in this room be very proud of the Australian Public Service, so thank you very much. Can I also acknowledge my wife, who's here without the kids? That's because my son, 4-year-old son, said attending last night's budget was the most boring thing he's ever done. And I think the cameras caught that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Australia is well on the road to recovery. And while the pandemic is not over, the Australian spirit continues to shine through. Recently, I met with Katie Graham, an owner of a small homeware store and cafe in Melbourne. They'd been in their premises for only 6 months when COVID hit. Suddenly their doors were closed, rent was due, and the staff needed to be paid. They took the difficult decision to stand down a staff member as they contemplated winding up their business. Then JobKeeper and the cash flow boost was announced. They brought back their staff and received temporary rent relief and a deferral on their bank loan with measures that were supported by the Morrison government. I spoke to Katie this week and her business is now back on its feet. She has kept all her staff and taken on a new one who was previously unemployed, and said that without the help of the federal government, her business would have folded and she feared she would have lost her house. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a story like so many others across the country. No community has been untouched. In response to the greatest economic shock since the Great Depression, we have now put in place an unprecedented $291 billion of direct economic support. That's more than double the commitments of all the state and territories combined, all aimed at helping get Australians through to the other side of this crisis. Extraordinary times have called for extraordinary measures. And as John Howard said to me on the eve of the announcement of JobKeeper, during times of economic crisis, there are no ideological constraints. The results are now clear. Our economy is coming back strongly. we have outperformed every major advanced economy in the world over the last 12 months. Consumer confidence is at an 11-year high. Business confidence is at a record high. And almost 1 million jobs have been added since the peak of the crisis. Australia's recovery is at the front of the pack. The economy is now expected to have reached its pre-pandemic level 9 months earlier than was forecast at the October budget. Real GDP is forecast to grow by 5.25% this calendar year, up from 4.25% at budget last year, to be around $50 billion higher across 2021. The unemployment rate is forecast to get back to pre-crisis levels just 2 years after its peak. This compares to 8 years after the recession of the 1990s and 10 years after the recession of the 1990s. It's worth remembering that following the GFC, the unemployment rate never got back to where it was. The unemployment rate is now forecast to reach 4.75% by the June quarter in 2023. With more Australians in work and less on welfare, the budget deficit this year has improved by $52.7 billion. There are good reasons for Australians to be confident about their economic future. But we all know that the job is not done. We are still in the middle of the pandemic. Here in Australia, we recently saw Western Australia go into lockdown. Around 800,000 new cases of COVID are being diagnosed around the world every day, and new strains of the virus continue to emerge. We've all witnessed the tragic events unfolding in India, and this is a solemn reminder of the threats that we face. That is why this year's budget is the next step in our economic plan to keep Australians safe and to secure our economic recovery. Our first priority must always be to protect Australian lives and contain the spread of the virus. Last night I announced a further $1.9 billion to support the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. With this investment, we have secured access to 170 million doses. We're also providing $1.5 billion to extend the COVID-19 health response until the end of 2021. This will continue to support rapid pathology testing and tracing that is so important to our continued success in containing the virus. And GP-led respiratory clinics, which have delivered more than 1 million COVID-19 tests. And it has been done to date, and it has continued the success on the health front that is the foundation for which we can secure our economic recovery. This budget will help secure our economic recovery in 3 important ways. First, it provides around $40 billion in targeted and temporary support to boost aggregate demand. Second, it invests in our workforce and skills to get more Australians into a job. And third, it provides incentives to boost workforce participation, particularly for women. There is no economic recovery without a jobs recovery. And there is no budget recovery without a jobs recovery. We must keep our momentum going, and we cannot afford to be complacent. We cannot risk losing the gains that have been made here in Australia as India's health crisis and the euro area's double-dip recession can attest. We must stick to our plan. Even more so with monetary policy heavily constrained with interest rates at an all-time low and population growth at the lowest in a century. We must continue to support the transition to private sector-led growth to create jobs and drive unemployment even lower. That is why the next stage of our plan outlined in the budget is designed to achieve that very end. We are extending the low and middle income tax offset this coming financial year. This will benefit around 10.2 million Australians, with most of the benefit going to those with taxable incomes around below $90,000. It will put an additional $1,080 into the pockets of individuals and $2,160 for couples. And it will flow through the economy just as our tax relief has done during the crisis to fuel record growth in household spending. This has given businesses the confidence to invest, to grow, and to create more jobs. We're also extending our record business tax incentives to drive more investment throughout the economy. This includes temporary full expensing and the loss carryback arrangements. This will deliver a further $20.7 billion in tax relief for Australian businesses that back themselves and invest in their future. This will drive economic activity in the short term and increase productivity in the long term. We know that our initial round of business investment plans have brought on new investment. Take Visy, Australia's largest paper, packaging and recycling company, employing 7,000 Australians. As a result of the accelerated depreciation policy announced last October, Visy announced it would bring forward $380 million in new job-creating manufacturing investment over the next 18 months. A new corrugated box factory in Brisbane will not only create 300 jobs, but support the growth of the food and beverage companies in the area. With machinery and equipment investment growing at its fastest rate in 7 years, these investments are happening right now across the country. An estimated $320 billion of investment is expected to be supported by our business tax incentives and create 60,000 jobs by the end of 22-23. More investment also generates a growth dividend over the longer term. During a recession, falls in investment can erode the capital stock and cause a drop in productivity. Our existing and new business tax measures will help alleviate this. We're also investing in the infrastructure Australia needs for the future, which will create the jobs today. This budget commits an additional $15.2 billion as part of the government's record $110 billion 10-year infrastructure pipeline. This commitment will support over 30,000 jobs across our country, including in regional communities. This will see our infrastructure commitments over the next 4 years total over $70 billion. These measures will boost aggregate demand. They will lock in our recovery and they'll create more jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that getting the unemployment rate below 5% will not be easy. The last time Australia sustained unemployment below 5% was between 2006 and 2008. Before that, you need to go all the way back to the 1970s. The budget forecasts that net overseas migration will be a decrease of 97,000 this year and 77,000 next year. This means less skilled migrants and less temporary workers in the short to medium term, making it harder for businesses to find the workers that they need. This is another reason why this budget continues to invest heavily in the skills that our economy needs today and into the future. We have committed more support for foundation skills so that any job seeker that needs it can receive training in literacy, numeracy and digital skills. We are investing further in the Job Trainer Fund, adding 163,000 places and extending the program until the end of next year. We have removed the cap on the number of trainees and apprentices under our $2.7 billion expansion to the Boosting Apprenticeship Commencement Scheme. Together, these measures will support a strong pipeline of new skilled workers and help boost participation and create jobs. As well as investing more in skills, the Morrison government wants to encourage even more Australians to participate in the labour market. Women's participation in the labour market has been rising over time. It currently sits at a record rate of 61.8%, up almost 7 percentage points since 2000. But despite this, it remains around 10 percentage points lower than the male participation rate. That is why the government has invested an additional $1.7 billion in last night's budget to improve childcare affordability. Our measures will benefit those families with multiple young children who face some of the highest barriers to participate in the labour market. This will improve affordability for around 250,000 families already in the childcare system and will equate to around 40,000 individuals working the equivalent of an extra day a week. Under these changes, a family earning $110,000 a year will have the subsidy for their second child increase and be $95 a week better off for 4 days of care. This will see more women in work, which is already at a record high. Further gains in closing the gender pay gap, which is already at a record low. And it will also bring more valuable talent and skills into the Australian labour market. This will benefit businesses and boost the economy by up to $1.5 billion a year. In this budget, we're also modernising our employment services to better match job seekers to the jobs. And we're increasing the wage subsidy for long-term unemployed job seekers from $6,500 to $10,000. That is how the budget will secure our economic recovery and drive unemployment down, by putting more money into the pockets of everyday Australians, providing incentives for private businesses to grow, to invest and to hire, investing in infrastructure, boosting skills and workforce participation. A lower unemployment rate will also put upward pressure on wages. As the labour market tightens, wages will begin to lift. Both the Treasury and the Reserve Bank have effectively said that the unemployment rate will need to have a 4 in front of it to see inflation and wages accelerate. The best way to deliver higher wages over time is to build a stronger and more productive economy and to drive unemployment down. That is why we have continued right through the pandemic to pursue sensible economic reforms. Reforms that make our economy more modern, dynamic and productive. Last night we launched a new patent box starting on the 1st of July next year. Under the patent box, income earned from new patents that have been developed in Australia will be taxed at a concessional 17% rate, almost half the rate that applies to large companies. We have cut red tape to allow for a uniform scheme for automatic mutual recognition of state and territory-based occupational licences and registrations. This reform will directly benefit over 124,000 workers who currently work across borders and an additional 40,000 workers who are expected to work across borders following these reforms. The time and cost savings associated with this reform for these workers is expected to increase GDP by $2.4 billion over the decade. We have also enhanced the R&D tax incentive, supporting more than 11,000 companies. We have made amendments to our insolvency framework to reduce complexity, time and costs. We have mandated electronic invoicing for all Commonwealth agencies. We have modernised business registers to reduce costs and cut red tape, and we have expanded the consumer data right to help consumers access better value services. There are many, many more examples of this type of microeconomic reform. A stronger and more dynamic economy is also the best way to deliver a stronger budget. Australia entered this crisis from a position of economic strength. This gave us the fiscal firepower we needed to respond to COVID-19 and to kickstart our recovery. And this strong recovery is already flowing through to a stronger budget position. Of the new decisions in the budget, around half reflect our further temporary support measures to support our recovery. Our tax cuts for individuals and businesses, our additional infrastructure and skills spending, and our additional spending on vaccines and COVID health measures. The other half reflects new investments, including more than $30 billion to undertake generational reform and lift the quality of essential services. These are important and necessary decisions. But despite these significant new investments, our overall fiscal position has not deteriorated. Our budget position has improved by $34.1 billion over the 4 years to 23-24 relative to the last budget. The budget deficit falls from 7.8% of GDP to 2.4% of GDP by the end of the forward estimates. Compared to budget last year, net debt, a key measure of fiscal sustainability, is projected to be lower each and every year over the next 10 years. And gross debt as a share of GDP peaks a year earlier. By the end of the medium term, gross debt is $65 billion lower to compare to what was expected just over 7 months ago in last year's budget. We've been able to make these necessary investments without undermining our fiscal position because of our strong economic recovery. Since the last budget and before new policy, tax receipts excluding GST have been revised up by $81 billion over the 4 years to 23-24. Iron ore has also made its contribution to the improved budget position. Company tax receipts are up by $25 billion. But it is the strong recovery in the labour market that has materially strengthened the budget, with personal income tax receipts up by $44.3 billion over the 4 years to 23-24. And spending on unemployment benefits are down by $11.7 billion. The direct benefit from more Australians in work is the benefit to the budget is more than double the contribution made by higher company tax receipts through a higher iron ore price. This is the benefit of our strong economic recovery. And we remain in a strong and sustainable fiscal position. Our debt remains low by international standards. As a share of the economy, it is around half of that of the UK and the US, and less than a third of that in Japan. Our debt servicing costs also remain historically low. In 21-22, our interest bill will be $17.8 billion or 0.8% of GDP. This is lower than the interest paid in 2018-19 at $18.9 billion or 1% of GDP. Despite recent increases in bond yields, the weighted average cost of our new borrowing in this budget is assumed to be around 1.6%. Treasury projections are that nominal GDP growth will exceed the nominal interest rate for at least the next decade. This means our overall interest bill is forecast to remain low at below 0.9% of GDP over the forward estimates. And this will reduce net debt as a share of GDP over the medium term as outlined in the budget papers. This is a critical element of our medium-term fiscal strategy. Net debt is expected to peak at 40.9% of GDP in June 2025 and then improve over the medium term to reach 37% of GDP in June 2032. We can move forward with confidence knowing that our fiscal projections are not beholden to volatile commodity prices. Today, the iron ore price is at record levels, trading at over $200 a tonne free on board. But our government has continued to adopt a prudent approach in this budget. We do not assume that those prices are sustained at such high levels. We protect the budget by not baking in future spending against a record high iron ore price. Instead, we assume that iron ore prices will fall back to $55 a tonne by the March quarter next year. This is in line with Treasury's best estimate of the long-term equilibrium price in the market. Of course, should iron ore prices remain at elevated levels, this will provide an upside to the budget bottom line. By way of example, if the iron ore price remains at above $150 a tonne until March next year, this would deliver a $12.5 billion boost to tax revenue over the next 2 years. Targeted and temporary measures to secure the economic recovery, prudent assumptions to protect the budget, strengthening the sustainability of our fiscal position by growing our economy and getting more Australians into work and off welfare. That is our plan. A plan that is working and a plan we must stick to in order to lock in the gains we have made. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, repairing the budget and growing the economy are always the best way to guarantee essential services. This budget undertakes generational reforms that will improve the quality and the sustainability of our essential services across aged care and mental health over the long term. We all want to see an aged care system that treats older Australians with the respect and the dignity that they deserve. Since the 18-19 budget, the Morrison government has committed to 83,000 additional home care packages. And in this budget, we have gone further. We'll be providing a record funding increase of $17.7 billion to improve the quality, the safety and the provision of aged care services. This is the single largest investment ever made in the sector. We are funding the immediate priorities in the system to improve quality and safety. But importantly, we're also reforming the sector, from home care right through to residential care, to ensure its long-term sustainability and to grow and to upskill the aged care workforce. We're providing $6.5 billion for the release of an additional 80,000 home care packages and giving the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission greater oversight of the home care system. We're providing $8.4 billion to reform residential care. We're increasing the minimum standard of care minutes provided to residents. And we're reforming the way residential care providers receive funding. Delivering a new, improved model for assessing people's care needs and targeting funding for care where it is needed most. Our comprehensive plan to strengthen the aged care system will improve the quality and the availability of care and strengthen oversight in the sector and create more care jobs. Ladies and gentlemen, for many Australians, COVID-19 has been an extremely difficult and testing time. And it's been a reminder to us all of the importance of protecting our mental health. In this budget, we are making a record investment of $2.3 billion in the mental health prevention and resilience services, suicide prevention services and expanded treatment options. We're establishing a new national network of adult mental health centres alongside states and territories, which will operate under a no wrong door approach so that everyone gets the care that they need. The centres will provide a new approach through multidisciplinary teams. Psychiatrists, GPs, psychologists, alcohol and drug specialists, mental health nurses, social workers and other specialists working together. We're also improving the availability of high-quality, free and low-cost digital mental health services to give people better options to access help earlier. And to help us work towards a goal of zero suicides in Australia, we're establishing a National Suicide Prevention Office to provide a nationally consistent whole-of-government approach to prevention. These are transformational investments in mental health that will help save lives and deliver a stronger economy through higher workforce participation. Ladies and gentlemen, as we gather here today, Australia is as well placed, if not better placed, than any other country in the world. In the midst of a global pandemic, we have successfully suppressed the virus. Our economic recovery now has real momentum. Our budget position is strengthening, our plan is working, but there is more to do. we cannot risk losing the gains that we have made. We must secure our economic recovery, and last night's budget does exactly that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Treasurer.